And welcome back to Music Free Static. I hope you're having a fabulous day. And, I've been thinking about Star Wars and Marvel and things like that because this is just what I do. But I've been thinking a little bit about this call I've been hearing often on the internet for more R-rated Star Wars movies or more R-rated MCU movies, right? Now, part of this is coming from like the success of Deadpool, right? With Deadpool, Deadpool 2 was sort of blah. Deadpool and Wolverine, people are all excited about, but those are they try very hard to earn their R rating, and I remember when Andor came out, there are a lot of people who are coming out and says, yes, Star Wars is finally growing up. We need more. We need more of this, and we need R-rated Star Wars. It's like, and I've been thinking about this for a long time because none of this actually makes sense to me. Okay, so I'm going to talk through some of this. It's just weird to my mind. Okay, and so let me set things up, and I'm going to focus mostly on Star Wars because that's where I really think the R-ratedness sort of falls down. But yeah, we'll talk Marvel too, okay? But Star Wars was written to be accessible for 12-year-olds. You'll often hear us, oh, Star Wars was written for 12-year-olds. Yeah, that's not entirely accurate, but partially. When George Lucas put out Star Wars, he wanted to tell a story that was accessible to 12-year-olds. He wanted something that they could watch and enjoy and get the base levels of the morality tale that he was telling, the fairy tales that he was telling, right? Now, the MCU has a slightly older audience, but it's sort of the same type of thing. So, with that in mind, what are people looking for when they're asking for an R rating in Star Wars or the MCU? I mean, what gets you an R rating, right? You're looking at like excessive profanity. You're looking at nudity and sex and all that stuff. You're looking at gore, right? Why? What does that bring to? What does that bring to a universe like Star Wars? Okay, and I'm thinking that maybe what they're actually wanting is, or maybe their argument is more like a proxy for wanting more mature storylines, perhaps. So let's take Andor for example. Andor was a great series. Okay, the writing was fabulous, the acting was great. It was less fantasy and less pulpy than Star Wars typically is. It was much more of a political drama. All right, which is fine. Star Wars has had political drama in it since the very beginning, right? I mean, they talk about dissolving the Imperial Senate, a rebellion against tyranny, right? These are sort of important concepts. We don't see them quite as much in the original series, but then you get to the prequels, which starts with the taxation of trade routes, and right? And that's what leads to the blockade of Naboo and all of this. Hey, political drama. This is what we want, right? Yeah, absolutely. But Andor took a very... the phrase I kept hearing was prestige television, right? If you were to dress that up in a non-Star Wars skin, you'd still have a fabulous show. But Star Wars gave this great framework of the rising tyranny of the Empire, the growing rebellion against that tyranny, right? All of that stuff. And we got to see 3 or 4 really interesting stories surrounding Cassian Andor, but as part of that universe, right? I think Andor showed we can have those mature storylines in Star Wars without excessive profanity, nudity, gore, right? So what do we get from an R rating, right? Now let's look at Deadpool for a moment. Deadpool, as they've had him in the movies. I can't speak to the comics much. I've only read a couple of Deadpool comics, and they were relatively tame. But Deadpool in the movies has been highlighted by its excessive profanity. As I recall, there was some nudity, at least in Deadpool 1. A lot of gore, right? They have fun getting things bloody. It's like, oh yeah, or in Deadpool 2, I think he was torn in half, right? Okay, that's great. But how much of that was actually necessary to tell the story, and how much of that gore actually helped to tell the story of Deadpool? I'm not entirely sure any of it did. Okay. Now, I said some of it was really funny, but did it really? Was any of this really necessary? Did it actually help here? And I worry sometimes. It's like, yes, we need the more dark and gritty, which doesn't work as well as sometimes people think. And Star Wars is a story about hope, right? They drive that into you over and over again in Rogue One, which is one of the better movies to come out since the prequels, right? In the Disney era, if you want to call it that. But let's look at some of the things that were in Star Wars, right? Starting with A New Hope, right? You're talking about a galactic genocide, right? The Death Star blows Alderaan to bits, completely wiping out most of that population, right? With the exception of a few people who happen to be off planet, like Leia, like Cara Dune, all of that fun stuff, right? You've got stories of tyranny and oppression and rebellion, and you want to see some dark and mature storylines? Go watch the Clone Wars or the Bad Batch or Rebels, right? They're animated, yes, but there are some amazingly deep and mature stories wrapped up in animation, right? You've got clones dealing with PTSD. The final storyline of season 5 with Ahsoka being framed and her trial and betrayal by the Jedi Order. Yes, it's wrapped up in a Star Wars skin. Yes, there are lightsaber fights and people doing fantastical things. But that is one of those crazy, intense, mature storylines. You look at the story of Asajj Ventress, and she was, if you haven't watched the Clone Wars, but have watched the movies, Count Dooku, who was the middle management of Attack of the Clones, right? He was supposedly the new big bad. He had an apprentice named Asajj Ventress. She was from Dathomir. She was a night witch. Dathomir is the planet that Darth Maul was from. Okay. And she was his assassin and troubleshooter and thug, and she was good at it. Okay. But she was also getting powerful, and Darth Sidious, Emperor Palpatine, decided that, you know what? She's getting too powerful. Dooku, time to kill her. Sorry. You're not allowed to have someone that powerful as your acolyte, if you want to think about that a little bit. And he tries and fails, and now it's this story of family and what do you do when everything turns against you. And yes, there's a story of revenge there too, and you get to see Dooku in his exquisite pajamas, but that storyline was dark and mature, and yes, it was wrapped in a veil of Star Wars pulpy magic. But that was a serious story, right? Or one of my favorite bit of Star Wars storytelling comes from season 7 of the Clone Wars, when Ahsoka, having left the Jedi Order, has been asked by Bo-Katan to help free Mandalore from Darth Maul. Okay. And with the help of the Republic, goes and does that. But just after they've freed Mandalore, they've captured Darth Maul, as they're on their way home, we're getting snippets of what's happening in Revenge of the Sith. Okay. Anakin is starting to fall. You know, so you can start to see, okay, they're sending Obi-Wan's Utapau to get Grievous. You're starting to see hey, Palpatine was a Sith, we're sending Jedi to stop him, right? And so you're seeing that storyline come out. Well, what you end up with from Ahsoka's side is, amongst all of that storytelling, is Order 66 happens. And she's now having to deal with the fact that these clones that were so loyal to her, they painted their helmets with the same markings that she has on her face, right? That's, these are some of the people she basically grew up with, because she grew up in war with the 501st as Anakin's Padawan, right? And that story of what's going on, how do I get out of it? But again, it's wrapped up in that, shooty action adventure comedy type stuff that is common on Star Wars. The Bad Batch takes right, it follows this group of clones that are weird in some ways, right? They're not the carbon clones that so many of them are. They're different. They've got weird traits, right? And season 1 is sort of the A-Team in space, okay? Especially when you get their introduction in season 7 of the Clone Wars. It is very much the A-Team in space. You've got your sniper and your tech guy and the leader, who's just generally just good at everything. You got your muscle, right? But as the story progresses throughout the 3 seasons of the Bad Batch, and you watch as the Empire starts to clamp down, right? It's still the very early days, so you still have a lot of the more or less goodness of the Republic, but you're watching it turn. And it's like, okay, yeah, turn in your Republic credits for new Imperial credits. And while you do that, you will be issued a chain code. And that chain code is used to track people throughout the galaxy. Watch as the Empire starts cracking down on liberties on planets, and as they're hunting Omega, and you're starting to see the fear of the Empire as it grows. These are serious storylines, and as you watch the Bad Batch, it can be sometimes easy to forget that this is an animated show, because of how mature some of these stories are. At the same time, they're still accessible to kids, right? And I don't mean they have to be, we have to play down to 6-year-olds here. But what I'm saying is, we can tell amazing stories. We can tell all of these stories with very mature themes without having to dip into all of the stuff that garners an R rating, right? It's one of the things I like about Star Wars is there's no profanity. Okay, can't say that about the MCU, but at least for the most part, it's not gratuitous. We're not dealing with nudity in either Star Wars or the MCU outside of Deadpool, um, right? Because again, Deadpool decides, oh, we're gonna go push that R rating hard, right? But what does nudity get you in any of these superhero stories? And the reality is just about nothing. Now, what I think is missing from the MCU to some extent, and even Star Wars to some extent, is you don't see a lot of romantic relationships. Okay, at least not in the movies and stuff. I think that's something that could come out a little bit more. Of course, I'm a romantic at heart, so you know. But just because there's a romantic relationship doesn't mean you need to show the characters getting it on, right? You don't need to see them without apparel rubbing body parts together. That is not necessary to show that people love each other, okay? And then you get to gore. Again, what does that get you? Now, there's definitely a place for those movies, right? I just don't think it's in the Star Wars universe, right? There are people that, yeah, they're totally into horror and they like that stuff. Awesome. You want a ridiculously profane action comedy? Go for it. Have that movie, right? Does it need to have that Marvel stamp on it? Does it need to have that Star Wars stamp on it? Why can't we have an IP that is just Fred Pond over here? I don't know. Where Fred goes on these whatever, heroic adventure, dropping F-bombs and slicing people into tiny little bits while somebody's prancing naked in the background. That, go for it. Have that. I will not be watching that movie. But, if there's an audience for that, you can do that. But why do we have to put the Marvel stamp on it or the Star Wars stamp on that? Okay. Why can't they be different things? Why can't Star Wars be that mythic storytelling that is accessible for 12-year-olds? Right? Why can't we have the MCU be these heroic superhero stories that are accessible for teens without having to drop F-bombs and flash, people's junk all over the place, right? And this is why I don't quite understand what the call for R ratings are in these movies, right? Because Andor was that great example of, look, we can tell a very adult storyline without getting into any of that. And I think some of it people just don't quite understand what Star Wars is. And I don't mean that in a, well, this is not my Star Wars type of thing. It's more like they grew up with Star Wars, but maybe they're ashamed of still liking Star Wars, and so they want something that looks like Game of Thrones or looks like Succession or some of these really adult dramas, because maybe that will justify their liking of Star Wars. I don't know. I said the whole call for that really is confusing to me. Now, one of the things I heard with the Harry Potter movies was most of those movies were rated PG. Okay, fine. Until you hit, it might have been the last two, which was the two-parter telling the story of Book 7, right? That was PG-13. And it was a little bit more intense. Okay, not that they were dropping profanity or anything like that, but it was a bit more intense. Okay, cool. But I heard some people, they were talking about, oh yes, Harry Potter needs to be PG-13 because it's growing with its audience. Okay, which I think is ridiculous as an argument, because it presumes that the audience is the same people all the time and will always be the same people. Okay? Yes, the people who watched Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone when they were kids, here it is now 10 years later. Okay, yes, and they're 10 years older. When they were 12 with Harry Potter, now they're 22. And yes, they may want more adult stories. But the reality is Harry Potter's audience is still that 12-year-old, right? That now 22-year-old dude, his little sister is coming up and watching Harry Potter. But she gets the advantage of getting to binge them, right? She is still the audience for that whole story. So, I don't know. If I knew, I wouldn't be rambling on about this for 20 minutes, right? Where is this coming from? What is the actual desire here? Why do we really want, right? Why are people calling for R-rated Star Wars and R-rated Marvel, right? Now, Marvel I can understand at least to some extent, because some of the Marvel comics, Deadpool is one, I think Blade is another. There are a few others, but there are some comic characters that have a history of leaning towards that side of storytelling. Okay, and that's just part of the source material. All right, fair. Okay, I'll grant you that. Star Wars was never that. So why are we trying to make it that? Right? Why are people trying to bring all of that into Star Wars? And I said I don't know. But honestly, my feel is that there are, especially given the dialogue around Andor, is that there are people who are just trying to justify why they like Star Wars or that they like Star Wars because, Star Wars has finally grown up. I said as one headline I saw had for Andor. Yeah, Star Wars has always been telling adult storylines. It just wraps it in a little bit more of a lighthearted skin. And all of that stuff from the R rating, the excessive profanity, the nudity, the gore, I don't think any of that helps these stories. Yeah, so let me know what you think. I mean, I'm curious where you go with it. And and I'm not sitting here saying, "Oh, we shouldn't have movies with that." And while I'd be happier if we had fewer stories with excessive profanity and nudity and gore. That's a thing, that's a personal taste and stuff like that. But I don't get it. So let me know your thoughts. Let me know, do you want R-rated Star Wars and why? Okay, what do those things that would garner an R rating bring to the story? Help me out here. Or if you're sort of with me, it's like, what does this mean? Why do we need this? Let me know. Drop a comment. And said I'm happy to chat about it too. If you want to swing over to my Discord, over to Music Free Gaming Discord, it's because trust me, I've thought about this a lot and I cannot wrap my head around it. So until next time, be excellent to each other. And this is Music Free Static signing off.